I'm delighted to see so many people back who are here and joined us at our first conference in May. Delighted to see so many new faces as well. I'm particularly pleased the timing here, I think, for this conference couldn't be better. Both generally, the markets have become a lot more interesting, and I wouldn't call it a good environment for short selling, but at least it's not a horrifically bad environment, which is what it's been for most of the last decade. And given where the market's indicating open today, it's particularly good timing today. The market may be offering good entry points for some of the ideas we'll be hearing today. I want to be sure to thank our sponsors, Centerpoint Securities, Velocity Capital, and Activist Insight. You'll be hearing from them later today. And I want to move quickly and get our first speaker up here. He's got 129 slides and a great idea. Gabriel Grego's been a friend of mine for many, many years now. He actually first reached out to me when he was living in Israel, and he was short SodaStream, and I was long SodaStream, and he reached out to me and said, did I want to compare notes? And I really respected that, and I wanted to hear the contrary viewpoint. SodaStream is an Israeli-based company, and it turns out we were both right. The stock went down by 2/3, so he was right on the short side, and then it went up 12x, and I was right on the long side. Gabriel is a long-short manager who's been doing this for quite a while, but he's really made a name for himself in identifying fraudulent companies, generally international companies, where he has does extraordinary due diligence. You saw that, those of you who were here in May, where he exposed total fraud at Foley. The stock was halted by the Greek regulators less than 2 weeks later. And has never traded again. They did an investigation and that verified and validated everything Gabriel had discovered. He has found another similar situation, I think, having reviewed the presentation. I can't wait for him to share it with you. So please welcome Gabriel Grego.
Can you all hear me? Yes. Well, by the way, I covered SodaStream before the 12x. Okay, great. So we have a long presentation, so I'm not going to waste too much time doing introductions. We're going to get right to business. The only thing I need to know is how this thing works.
The green button in the middle is advancing.
Okay. And behind is the red button on the left? Great. Okay, just a few things to understand like the general principle. What we do is we only go after catastrophic situations, typically fraud. We only act if we have what I believe is overwhelming evidence to probably take the company down if the thesis is correct. And we only act. In other words, we don't shorten hope. So this is what I'm trying to do here. And I would like to give recognition to my good friend and the person who actually, number one, had this idea, and number two, share with me the burden of this work, which is Nate Anderson from Hindenburg Research, which should be somewhere in this room. Maybe you want to stand up. There you go. Thank you, Nate. So as I said, and I also said it the last time we were here, I'm not too courageous when I'm doing this kind of campaigns, so I only act if I'm 100% sure. On average, if we act against a company, and these are the only 5 times we acted against a company, this is the 6th time today, in about 3 years, the average stock price drop has been around 90%. I hope the same thing is going to happen today. But you'll want to get to business, so let's get to business. The company is called Aphria. I suppose many of you may be familiar with it. It's a cannabis company. But this presentation is not about cannabis. We have our own opinions about cannabis, and they're not relevant. We believe that something very sinister and very particular may be happening at this company. And that's why I gave it the title, A Black Hole for Shareholders' Money, because exactly this is what's happening here. Let's get to business. A darling of the cannabis industry, almost $3 billion Canadian market cap, used to be 5 until recently. It's domiciled in Canada, but it recently started trading on the New York Stock Exchange. We'll see whether that will prove to be a mistake. Sales, about $30 million. EBITDA, negative $500,000, and price to sales ratio until recently was 85 times. It's now definitely a value stock. Again, you can see the market cap versus sales. Sales are almost non-existent. And the interesting thing is lately, since last year, they started on a very ambitious investment campaign. Have you seen they've been burning cash? They don't generate any cash from operation, and they've been using a lot of cash from investments at an accelerating rate. We will see how this is critical to the thesis. Because of this acquisition, their balance sheet right now is mostly composed by goodwill, intangibles, and a few investments in cannabis stocks. So in other words, if the value of this acquisition proves to be nil, we believe the same thing should happen to the value of the company. That is the way that Aphria likes to portray itself. They keep touting this sentence. They want to be the low-cost pot producers. We will see exactly whether the company is actually low-cost. What do we believe is the reality here behind the veil that the company tries to portray? The company went on a 700 million Canadian dollars M&A spree. Prices paid for these assets are incredibly outrageous for buying what we believe are nearly worthless assets. Acquisitions have been executed with a bunch of shell companies, apparently unrelated, but we believe are secretly controlled and most likely owned by insiders. In short, we believe that Aphria, besides being a company, is actually a scheme to funnel money from retail investors into the pockets of shareholders. These are what we define as insiders. On the right, you see Vic Neufeld, which is the CEO of Aphria, and the chairman of Scythian. Scythian is the sister company of Aphria, which Aphria seems to use as its vehicles to perform the first of these double-dipping M&A. And the guy in the middle, that's a real photograph. We took it from his Instagram account. Is Mr. Andy DeFrancesco. He is a former broker and investment banker, and he self-defines himself as the architect of both Aphria and Scythian, is the person behind the reverse merger of both companies, and is now also the chairman and chief investment officer of Scythian, which is a sister company of Aphria. What do we believe is going on? In our opinion, money is funneled from retail shareholders into Aphria, which then buys companies from its sister company, Scythian, which in turn takes over all sort of companies in emerging markets mostly, but it doesn't take them over directly, but always going through these shell companies, typically Canadian shell companies, which theoretically are arm's length transaction, but in practice, those companies, we believe, we will show you very strong evidence that they're actually related to the company's insiders themselves. So in other words, they open these companies, they make almost worthless acquisition in emerging markets, and then they use their own public vehicle to take themselves over. That is the thesis, that is our opinion. There is a prologue. So earlier this year, Aphria closed a deal of almost $500 million Canadian dollars to buy this company called Nuvera. Nuvera was nothing more than a bunch of non-binding letters of intent and was bought for $500 million. Nobody almost even ever heard of the company. Hindenburg Research, which sits today right here at the table, wrote a daring report on this transaction, flagging some red flags. Number one, the fact that the company seemed to be almost worthless. And number two, the fact that it looked like insiders had bought themselves personal stakes in the M&A target before they caused Aphria to take the company over. The Canadian press reported on it, and the thesis was validated. At the end of the day, the insiders admitted having shares in the takeover target and didn't disclose it. The stock went down as much as 30%, but then went back up because of the cannabis boom that you saw this summer. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to tell you that they are at it again. They're doing it again in an even more blatant way with their Latin American acquisition. Only this time, I believe we caught them. They bought 3 companies, one in Jamaica called Marigold, one in Colombia called Colcanna, and one in Argentina called APHA. The company defines this company as leading assets in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is how the acquisitions were performed. We saw before, Aphria bought them from Scythian, who bought them from these 3 shell companies in Canada. And these shell companies bought the assets themselves in these emerging countries just a few months before. The first acquisition we're going to review is a company called Marigold. They bought this company for 145 million Canadian dollars, about 120 million US. This is the press release when they bought the company. They're proud to have received all these licenses from the Jamaican Cannabis Licensing Authority. They believe they have a team with cutting-edge science and a prestigious management team led by this guy, Lloyd Tomlinson, who will continue as managing director of the company. Great, that's what they say. What's the reality? We've been on the field. We looked for this company inside and out. We saw the infrastructure. We dig very deeply into the official filings. We sought out the directors. We checked out the residential address and so on and so forth. And we will show how the reality is quite different. First of all, when the company was acquired, very little was disclosed about it. There was not even an address. There was not even a website. We found the registered address of the company by looking at the official filings. You can see right there, the company is located on 28 Lancaster Road in Kingston, Jamaica. And of course, we visited. That's myself. That's right in front, 28 Lancaster Road. And that is what is supposed to be the registered address of a $150 million company. From outside, it looks okay, a bit residential, but maybe passable. And I'd like to stress that this was taken at 10 a.m. in the morning in the middle of a working day. I think the pictures speak for themselves. From the outside, it doesn't look too promising. It looks like a little, maybe R&D facility right there. That's the inside, ladies and gentlemen, inside the building of a $150 million company. So what's going on here? We went to check out the property records, and we saw that that property actually used to belong up to 1 year ago to this guy, Lloyd Tomlinson, who presents himself as the managing director of the company. But the property was foreclosed by CIBC Bank and would then force sell to the Jamaica Music Society, which has nothing to do whatsoever with Marigold. Those are the official findings. We copy-pasted for you. After that, on September 2018, so after our first visit to Jamaica, the company released this document whereby they claim that Aphria has all sort of leases. So an agricultural plot that we looked for about 2 months, we never could find it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but we couldn't find it. An office space on 22 Trafalgar Road in Kingston, and what they call the Herb House at 38 Trafalgar Road in Kingston. So of course, we went to check them out. That's the office space. And that's what it looks like. We went to visit it, again, during office hours, and the door is locked. The lights are on, but the door is locked. It's a 1.5-room office. We spoke to the neighbors who say that the people that work there barely ever show up. So it's virtually inactive. You can see there is a paper sign for a $150 million company more than 6 months after the acquisition, and a little plant right there that probably needs a little watering. More shockingly, we found out that the date for closing of this lease was the 23rd of April 2018, which is way after the acquisition was even announced. In other words, when the company got acquired, its only office was the dilapidated building you saw before. Moving right on. That's what they call the Herb House, that they say it is at 38 Trafalgar, Unit 51. We went to check it out, and guess what? The landlord told us, hey, there is no Unit 51. You don't have to take it from me, take it from our man in Kingston that checked it out. Oh, there's no audio here? No? All right, sorry. Well, something's wrong with the presentation, but let's keep going. That is the list of Marigold directors. You see Lloyd Tomlinson, Delroy Barrett, and a bunch of others. We studied some of them as much as we could. And here what came out. The first director, we actually met with her. We didn't discuss, of course, Marigold affairs, but we just wanted to understand what kind of person she was. She was a very nice lady in Kingston, Jamaica. That's myself right outside of her office. I sat a couple of times with her for a couple of hours. And guess what? She said that she never ever even served on any corporate board, let alone Marigold. And she even signed a document, you see right there, that's her passport, where she denies in writing ever serving on a corporate board and not being affiliated with any company except for the Jamaican Stock Exchange Best Practices Committee. There is no mention on Marigold whatsoever, even though you can see that on the top right, that document was taken from Marigold official filings. That's her signature as a director of Marigold. Take your own conclusions. Just the stock exchange. I didn't hear any Marigold or anything else over there. Moving on, the managing director, Mr. Lloyd Tomlinson of Marigold, which is also director, you can see that on the official filings, he write down that his residential address after the property was repossessed, according to the information we saw, was actually the dilapidated building that we saw before. So both Marigold and his CEO are supposed to live in that place. Moving on, we have this other director called Mr. Ray Anthony Chin, who calls himself a genetic engineer living on number 7 Norbrook Crescent in Kingston, Jamaica. Of course, we visited the place. That's myself in front of number 7 Norbrook Crescent in Jamaica. I spoke with the tenant. There is no mention of any Ray Anthony Chin. Nobody ever heard about him. Maybe he was living there before, maybe not. Moving right on. He's a really genetic engineer. There is no LinkedIn page, no trace of him in any university, no social media present, no ResearchGate, nothing whatsoever. A mystery cutting-edge scientist, apparently. Let's keep going. Next director, Mr. Bill Dina, who calls himself on the documents an engineer. We couldn't find him anywhere. The only trace of him we found is on this LinkedIn page that lists a person with the same name as a student. No engineer here. So directors that douse on their residential addresses, on their profession, and they deny their involvement with this company. This is a Aphria press release where they're boasting about receiving this prestigious and hard-to-get, probably licenses from the Jamaican authority, which, since the company doesn't have an office operation or prestigious directors, maybe is what is justifying a $150 million valuation. So what did we do? We went to check out and spoke with the people at the Jamaica Cannabis Authority. I spent with them a couple of hours and asked them, what's so special about these licenses? The answer, nothing. They already gave out, by the time of this acquisition, already 80 of them, 22 final ones. How much does it cost? $500. How long does it take? Less than 6 months. Is it given only to exceptional people, with incredible scientific achievements? No. They get given to everybody automatically as long as you don't have a criminal record and you're in good standing. More worryingly, Mr. Tomlinson foolishly gave an interview to The Gleaner, which is the major Jamaican newspaper, where in this interview he seems to say that they're still waiting for final licenses. In other words, they only have conditional licenses with which presumably they cannot produce because they're not producing anything. They don't have any open herb houses yet and no production. Finally, we can see the comparable transaction of this company. So a lot of Canadian companies, some Canadian companies went to Jamaica and bought themselves a local producer. We only found overall 4 transactions, including Marigold. 2 of them went out for 10 million US dollars, and Canadian dollars, one for 2.5 million. The R&D Pharma transaction is very similar to the one we just saw, to Marigold. In other words, they're buying licenses and a little plot of land, apparently. So when the other Canadian companies buy a company in Jamaica, even by the crazy cannabis standards of today, they pay from $10 to $2.5 million. But if Aphria buys a company, they pay $150 million almost. What's going on? Is it just a case of really bad management, or there is something more going on? Because they're spending $145 million for no sales, no assets, no operations, and only conditional licenses. Where did the money go? Well, you need to follow the money to understand. You can see over there the flow of money, but in chronological order, we believe that insiders, they basically shop around emerging countries. They buy themselves what is a nearly worthless asset or a very small company for themselves, for companies they themselves control, and then they cause first Scythian, a public company we believe they control, and then Aphria to take them over at increasing prices. For example, in this case, the shell company that seemed to have been used is called Marigold Acquisition. You can see it there in yellow. Here you see the timing of all the transactions. You see Marigold Acquisition turns up in the official press release by Scythian when they originally announced the M&A. The name of the company, again, is Marigold Acquisition. And here we're going to show you the first of many smoking guns of this presentation. Who is behind this Marigold Acquisition? Is this transaction arm's length? Because no insiders ever disclosed their involvement with this company. Marigold Acquisition, ladies and gentlemen, was actually called De Lavaco Ventures. What is De Lavaco? De Lavaco is the personal investment bank of the guy you see on the right that we saw earlier, Mr. Andy DeFrancesco, who is behind both Aphria and Scythian. He's currently the CIO of Scythian. He's the person who engineered all the financial deals. And you see that they actually changed the name of the company from Delavaco Ventures, Delavaco is the name of his personal company, into something neutral like Marigold Acquisitions, in our opinion, to hide the fact that they're involved, that an insider is actually involved in the company that they're just selling to their public parent. We saw also some other worrying traces. This Marvin Eigelman and Clifford Stark were given, almost given, the same stake that was later purchased by Aphria for $150 million about a year later, at the price of $1 Jamaican per share, a total of $100 US for half that company. This is the official findings that seem to suggest this. Who are these people? Well, these people look very suspiciously close to Delavaco and De Francesco, resident in Canada. This guy, Marvin Eigelman, worked for many years under De Francesco as Standard Securities, and he had an active role in many deals that were backed by this Delavaco. Similar story for this Clifford Stark. Moving on, the next acquisition, $84 million acquisition of Colcanna, a similar company, this time in Colombia. This is the press release where they say that, again, they bought this company, not directly, but through a Canadian shell company, this time called MMJ Colombia. We'll get to this later. This company at least has an office, has a presence. Of course, we visited the office and took photographs from the inside. It's not exactly what you would expect for a almost $100 million company, but there are people working there. We cannot say the same about the infrastructure and the plot of land that don't seem exactly state-of-the-art. More worryingly, at the time of acquisition, the company didn't have licenses yet, and they even wrote it on their website. They said they were still waiting for the licenses. This is the official filings, which show that, number one, the company was established only 3 months before the announced M&A deal, and it had 0 sales and pretty much 0 assets, right there in the official filings. So we asked around some people which are familiar with the Canadian cannabis industry and with Latin American reality. What did they say? Quote, at the time of purchase, Colcanna didn't even have a license. You shouldn't view the Colcanna deal as representative of values because it's a very stinky deal. What does it mean by that? Source number 2, quote, I don't think Colcanna is one of the 4 companies approved to do characterization, which is a necessary requirement for cultivation. If the company doesn't have it, then it's a huge red flag. Moving on, this time we found plenty of comparable transactions. Pretty much every large Canadian player bought themselves their little corner in Colombia to produce local cannabis. On average, the price paid per hectare of land was about 900,000 Canadian dollars. Guess what is the price paid by Aphria? 5 times as much, almost 4.5 million Canadian dollars for that transaction. It's a total outlier. Again, where did the money go? It's the same story. Flows from shareholders through copious and diluting share issues into Aphria, which then bought the company, Colcanna, we just saw for $84 million, who shortly before that bought it from Scythian for $39 million, which bought it itself from this shell company called MMJ Colombia, which we believe is related to the insiders for reasons we believe. The assets bought themselves are probably much cheaper than that, and in our opinion, nearly worthless. Second smoking gun that we're going to show you. Guess who is behind MMJ Colombia? In what starts to look like a familiar pattern now, the former name of MMJ Colombia was changed two months before the acquisition. The former name was Delavaco Colombia Partners, Inc. And Delavaco is the company that belongs to one of the insiders, Mr. De Francesco. They changed the name right before. Guess who is the administrator of the shell company? Mrs. Catherine De Francesco. Who is she? She's the wife of Mr. De Francesco. Moving on, third company, ABP. This company was bought for 50 million Canadian dollars. This is the press release, quote, ABP SA is an established and successful pharmaceutical import and distribution company with a bunch of prestigious research agreement and with the prestigious Argentine hospitals. Okay, so from reading this press release in full, you would guess that they just bought themselves Express Script or McKesson or some CVS, like a large distribution chain in all of South America. When they made the acquisition, they said that the company sold around $11 million US and was profitable. The reality, according to us, ABP is not a large distribution company. It's actually a single retail pharmacy of one shop in a bad neighborhood of Buenos Aires. The office is in a usual dilapidated building. Seemingly lucrative contracts, incredibly, are just donations. So they're essentially Aphria is giving ABP and Aphria are giving out product for free. And finally, really interestingly, we found out that ABP sales, according to the evidence that we will show you, are not $11 million, but $430,000. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ABP SA. That's what the company is one retail pharmacy in this neighborhood in Buenos Aires. That's the address taken from Google. And of course, we went inside so you can take a pic. One pharmacy, much smaller than your local CVS, for $50 million. That's a receipt as a proof that we visited the place with the name of the company right there. This is the office on Juan Carlos Gomez 68. It's in another area in Buenos Aires you probably don't want to go at night. It took us 2 visits just to figure out how to get in. You will see that there is a door right next to that tree. That's actually the entrance. There is no sign whatsoever, no intercom, nothing. Of course, it would have been nice to visit the facilities and to visit what's actually inside the company, the office itself. And so that's exactly what we're going to do now. In our understanding, the company is on the 3rd floor of this building. That's it. This room, to our understanding, is the offices of ABP. A bunch of janitors, 1 chair, 1 PC, and a few cardboard boxes for a $50 million company. That's what it looks like. Moving right on. These are the people that work for the company. This is the CEO. His resume seems compatible with the person that runs a single pharmacy. Gustavo, who on LinkedIn he writes he's a student. Mr. Martin Irala, who is a worker of ABP on LinkedIn, but a soccer player and coach on Facebook, and he's 20 years old. We checked the web prominence of this company, and it was completely undetectable, both on Alexa and on SimilarWeb, so there is no website traffic whatsoever. They opened a Facebook page way after the acquisition with only 7 followers who we presume are either Aphria or ABP employees. There is nothing new posted since August. Remember when we said that the company declared that the turnover of ABP is $11 million, right? Yes. First of all, you see on Dun & Bradstreet, the actual amount is more like $200,000, which is what you would expect from a single pharmacy. And then we went to ask Mr. Gustavo that works over there, what is the turnover of the company works for? The answer was 15 million Argentine pesos, $400,000 US dollars. Let's see if the other works. I expect it will not.
Okay.
Actually, it does.
¿Cuánto es más o menos para comprender la dimensión del negocio en Argentina?
En Argentina, dimensión del negocio.
Sí, la ventas para un orden de grandeza, por comprender. So, $100,000 o 5 millones, no sé, más o menos.
Y actualmente serán aproximadamente unos 15 millones de pesos argentinos.
15 millones de pesos argentinos.
Sí.
Okay.
For those of you who don't understand Spanish, 15 million Argentine pesos is $400,000 at today's exchange rate. Next, they touted a lot, as much as they could, this deal with the Garrahan Hospital, a prestigious pediatric hospital in Buenos Aires. You can see it in the photograph. This is the press release where Scythian, again, the sister company of Aphria, which first took over that shell, is boasting about having closed its first purchase order with this prestigious hospital. You see there the word purchase order that appears twice. Guess what, though? A press release, this time in Spanish, from the Garrahan Hospital says that it's not a purchase, but actually that Aphria will donate, Aphria from Canada will donate the drug to the hospital. So which is which? Are they buying or is this a donation? So we went to ask to the Garrahan Hospital. You can see there myself speaking with Mr. Schiaffini, who is the Department Chief of Communication for the Garrahan Hospital, who says, yeah, it's a donation. You don't have to take my word for him. Let's hear it from him. Oh, actually, it looks like the audio is not there. It is.
Where do they come from? Canada. They come from Canada? Yeah. Okay. But we from many companies or one company?
No, one company. That company makes the because you need to be sure that they are going to give you the amount
correct
of
rate.
oil, yes, and the amount of oil that you need, not only for this study,
Yes.
because you can give. Well, now it is working. Yes, so now I can sell you because these 100 kids, they need to be sure that they are going to have this oil for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
So the company accept that compromise.
Yes.
You know, and they are going to give us the oil for this
free.
For free. Yes. For the essay and for not essay, the study and
The follow-up.
Yeah.
In other words, Aphria is donating them the money for free for a lifelong longitudinal study of 100 kids which suffer from epilepsy. They're going to have to give them all for free, pretty much for all of their life. The hospital is very grateful for the generous donation, courtesy of Aphria shareholders, but they say that they are being bugged all the time by Aphria that keeps calling them to issue press releases about this transaction. Moving on. So Tilray, which is not exactly a value stock, just bought themselves a very similar company with a similar rationale, a bunch of pharmacies in Chile, which with presence in South America, for 5 million Canadian dollars. This company, we checked it out, is called Aleph Biotechnology. It has sales of $1.3 million. So how does it work? Tilray, not exactly a cheap stock or one known for its frugality, buys himself a 1.3 million turnover pharmacy, and they pay $5 million. Aphria buys itself a $400,000 pharmacy, and they pay $50 million. So one pays 4 times sales, and Aphria pays 113 times sales. By now, you probably understand what's going on here. Guess which shell company was bought. MMJ International is the shell company that was used to make this acquisition. The same day, Andy DeFrancesco, the guy in the photograph, was made chairman of Scythian. And again, follow the money. Company bought for $50 million from Aphria to Scythian, which bought it from this MMJ International, which bought this worthless pharmacy down there. Again, we believe that behind MMJ International is Mr. DeFrancesco and its Delavaco private investment group. Another smoking gun. MMJ International was formerly called Delavaco MMJ International. The company changed name exactly 2 months before the acquisition. Another Canadian shell. Obviously, I mean, it seems to us as though these are attempts to hide the involvement of company's insiders into this deal. In case you're not 100% convinced, we'll show you another private Instagram photograph of Mr. DeFrancesco, who is boasting 2 days before the acquisition was announced from Scythian of having just bought for himself and his Delavaco group a pharmacy in Argentina, while holding a pack of condoms and what we believe is a box of generic Viagra in the other hand. You can see there Andy Francesco and the Delavaco group. He says, I just bought my first pharmacy in Argentina. He even hashtags greed is good. Again, this was 2 days before the acquisition was announced. Of course, he doesn't say that this pharmacy is ABP. He says a pharmacy in Argentina. Maybe it's something else. Wrong. That's a photograph taken by myself from a different angle. You can see very well the black chair on the white panel under the window. On the right, you can see the black chair on the white panel under the window. Ladies and gentlemen, that is ABP. He just buys a pharmacy for himself, then sells it to Scythian for $50 million, to Aphria for $50 million. So what did they buy for 736 million Canadian dollars? Well, a bunch of assets as you saw before. Mostly dilapidated building, health licenses, and so on, and single pharmacies. Who is this DeFrancesco guy, which seems to be behind this whole game? Well, he was integral to the formation of Scythian and Aphria. He's been orchestrating the reverse mergers that took them public. He's the founding investor, Serpil Crane founding investor, and special advisors to both companies, leading all the financing rounds, currently serving as the chairman and CEO of Scythian, and the CIO of Delavaco Group. Interestingly, if there's not enough evidence to see that this guy is an insider, Scythian address, corporate address, is the same place as his personal company address, Delavaco. And this is a screenshot we took from his website. He removed this part, obviously, later on, but we got it on the Wayback Machine, where he calls himself the founding investor to Aphria. Therefore, for all practical purposes, one of Aphria's insiders. What do the Canadian regulators think about this character? Quote, he was deceptive and had little regard for truth. This is a complaint about Andy DeFrancesco, about actually a guy called Bobby Genovese, which we will see shortly, and also his relationship with Mr. DeFrancesco by what we understand is Canadian equivalent of the SEC, was deceitful, was deceptive, little regard for truth. Who is Bobby Genovese that shares with him this complaint, apparently? Well, a person charged with fraud. Another interesting association is with the guy called Barry Honig, which I'm sure at least half of the people in this room know very well who he is. You can see him stepping off his private jet. The SEC charged him for manipulation and pump and dump schemes. You can see here too, microcap fraud schemes. Why do we believe they're associated? Well, they show up as shareholders in similar companies. For example, Riot Blockchain that collapsed 95%. My friend Hindenburg wrote a very nice report on it. And he was also, through apparently his company, an active investor to this riot, ousting the previous board of directors and replacing it with people which shortly afterwards were all alleged by the SEC to have committed market manipulation. But we will show you another smoking gun if somebody has doubts whether Mr. DeFrancesco and Barry Honig are deeply associated. Delavaco's address is right here on 2300 Las Olas Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale. That property is owned by a company called Las Olas Sunset Bay. Guess what? Guess who manages this Las Olas Sunset Bay? And this is another smoking gun we're going to show you. The sole managers of Las Olas Sunset Bay are Mr. Barry Honig and Andy DeFrancesco. Moving right on. Evidence from field sources. Well, we spoke to a lot of people in the industry and we asked them, hey, I mean, this is really strong evidence. Are we dreaming or there is something here? This is what they say. And I quote, from a private equity investor with experience in Canada and Latin America. There is no way that ABP and Colcanna are worth $90 million each. There is something fishy going on. And another one. They have historically had their hands on a lot of companies that get vended into Aphria, and rumors are that this is what happened here. And again, there is some double dipping going on. The Aphria guys were also on the inside of Scythian. The Latin companies get vended to Scythian and then onto Aphria. And again, get this. When Marigold was sold to Scythian, it was the Aphria guys who turned up for the due diligence visit. This was well before the Aphria deal was even announced. It's pretty sketchy. Take a look at Andy DeFrancesco, I'll say no more. And more. Nuvera was a shady company that went around Europe acquiring licenses and letter of intents with governments. These were of questionable value, but the company paid them also almost $800 million. Eventually, the offer was toned down to $400, by the way. Aphria insiders had shares in Nuvera. It was a pump and dump. It's assumed by everyone in the industry that Scythian is the Latin American version of Nuvera. And more. Aphria is the one that did the due diligence on the Jamaica project, like the other guy was saying before. Even before it was announced that they were taking over Scythian, there were Aphria guys with investments in those companies, and they benefited from the pump. And damningly, quote, insiders had positions in Scythian, and they dumped it onto Aphria shareholders. Another name you should look into is Andy DeFrancesco. He's the guy rumored to have put the whole thing together. Finally, we heard a lot of rumor that the quality of the merchandise is of questionable quality. So we spoke to a former worker, a factory floor worker, who basically told us what is the condition on the factory floor. And I quote, a lot of people who are running the shows are young, they don't know what they're doing. We're constantly running into errors and not passing audits with Health Canada and having issues with bugs. It kind of became like a circus. There is a huge lack of communication. It's getting worse and worse. We had a lot of issues with mold, and right now the facility is infested with bugs. Every single room that has product in that Leamington facility right now has bug problems. To sum up Aphria, you're talking about an almost $3 billion company with virtually no sales, assets acquired at absurd valuations, extensive evidence of insider transactions, likely to have to take a giant write-off because that balance sheet, that goodwill, and the intangible that they bought are the companies, are the dilapidated buildings that you saw before, which don't even belong to the company, by the way. So we're pretty confident to say that the target price for this Aphria is 0. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions if we're not too late.
We have time for a few questions. If yes, let's see. Glenn, go ahead. Okay, wait for the microphone, Glenn. Someone's come.
Terrific, wonderful work. Does the company, in the absence of all this nonsense, have any book value? Does it have any cash, any debt, anything that would put its value above a 0 in addition to this?
Well, they have some production facilities, which for this industry mostly means greenhouses in Canada. They have cash because they keep issuing shares all the time. So they have some cash which is raised by their shares. I'm sure they spent a lot of it in these latest transactions. We'll see it in the next earnings report. So the company is not leveraged. In other words, I don't think we'll have cash issues immediately. But I wouldn't see anything else that would justify not even anything close to this value. Again, sales are about 30 million Canadian dollars for a market cap of $3 billion.
Right up front here. Oh, someone back there, and then we'll go up front. Go ahead.
Terrific presentation. I think the stock's down 30% in the pre-market, just as an indication. So when you were in Jamaica, did you try to get a license yourself? Was it that easy to get a cannabis license?
Well, I probably could not have taken a license, even though I went over there to inquire how does it work. The reason is those licenses are given only to Jamaican people, citizens, or even Jamaicans living abroad. So no, the answer is I went there, just asked him some question and told him that I wanted to learn how it worked.
Right up here.
Hey, question. So about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, there was a story in the Canadian press that said that Aphria was actually looking to invest in this company.
Yes.
And I was wondering, during the course of your due diligence, did you actually speak to Aphria? Was there any truth to this? Did they do due diligence? Did they see the same things that you had seen? Were they some of the sources that were up there mentioned?
No. Well, first of all, we did not seek out, of course, Aphria because it probably would not have been legal. We didn't see in the course of our due diligence anything that even remotely makes us think that there is an imminent deal. And we assume that before they, even assuming that they're about to make a deal, which I really don't think so, the deal would be immediately torpedoed if they just take a pick at whatever they're trying to buy.
Back here, all the way in the back.
Thanks, great work. The stock's down pre-market. Do you think that's people selling or shorting? Do people that own the stock know what they own?
Well, it's very interesting because theoretically nobody outside this room should know about it. So I don't know. So I would guess that maybe some of you guys are trading online when I'm speaking. I don't know.
Actually, Gabriel, your office, as you were speaking, sent around saying, dear friends of Quintessential, and sent out a copy of the slides. And Hindenburg Research just published on Seeking Alpha.
Got it.
So
well, then I guess it's panic selling by retail shareholders.
So your work is, both your work and the Hindenburg article are now both out there publicly. So yeah, right here.
So, 2 questions. So I noticed that Andy DeFrancesco spent a lot of time on Twitter and Reddit defending himself, and especially the New Vera transaction. And it almost seemed, I don't know if maybe it was just the greater cannabis market that lifted the stock back up previously. Do you think there's any way that he can talk his way out of this?
That's very interesting. I'm not a lawyer, so my opinion probably doesn't count very much as to understand what are the legal implications of this. As a person that doesn't understand much about law, it seems to be extremely serious. So, okay, there is always a way out, but when I show this to the legals that follow our firm, they said that this is pretty damning.
And did you have an idea, as far as your cash, when do you see that running out?
It's very hard to say. Usually what happens in these things, if people believe what we're saying and understand the thesis, they will find it impossible to raise any further cash in the future through share issues. So it's just a matter of time. The cash burn rate is not enormous yet, so I'm sure they have gas at least for another year.
Okay, so 1 year. Yeah, just a commentary on that. What I did notice was that it seems the cannabis space has Recently, MedMen had done a bought deal that they had to downsize. So it seems to me that maybe we've peaked and it is trending a little bit down where investment banks are less likely to fund this. So I think that could be, obviously down the line, a lack of ability for them to tap the capital markets for sure, just with all this overhang.
Yeah, I mean, look, we didn't do this to damage the cannabis industry. I think it's a legitimate industry. I think investors should be careful every time they're buying something at those extremely high valuations. So I wish the other cannabis companies all the best. I just hope that the retail investors of Aphria, or more importantly, those that could have become retail investors of Aphria, to know exactly what they're buying into. So that's why we're doing this.
I will share with you one comment from very experienced hedge fund managers who's done a lot of investing in the cannabis space and has hired, as is typical whenever he invests anywhere, hires a company that does background checks for him. And so the woman at the company told him, I didn't even have a chance to share this with you, Gabriel, but said, typically over the many hundreds of background checks that this woman has done for my friend, maybe 10% of the background checks reveal significant red flags over the course of hundreds of background checks they've done across many industries. And the woman came back to my friend and just chuckled and said, it's the opposite here. Like basically 90% of the people we do background checks on come up with significant red flags. This industry is the Wild West. This is probably just the most extreme example. Let me throw a question in to you, Gabriel. Do you have any reason, your question, sir, sort of assumed that this is a normal company and that, when will they run out of cash, et cetera, but that isn't what happened with Foley Foley. Regulators in Greece halted the stock less than 2 weeks later, pending an investigation, and that revealed that the company was fraudulent, and the stock never traded again. It just ceased trading within 2 weeks. Do you have any reason to believe, Gabriel? Can you share anything about whether you have any reason to believe regulators might act in this case?
Well, I think, and I said at the beginning, that in my opinion, a big mistake was listing themselves on the New York Stock Exchange. We're not too familiar with how many teeth Canadian regulators have, but we are all familiar with the SEC, and I'm sure that they'll be extremely interested in understanding whether our thesis is correct.
Okay. Why don't we've gone a little bit over, but fortunately we built in some extra time at the break. So Gabriel, will you be around today, if just around staying at the conference today?
Yeah, absolutely.
For people who want to follow up at any of the breaks with Gabriel. So thank you. Tremendous work, Gabriel.
Thank you very much.